Naviae, Navio, Naviae, Navio, Helengo, Helengo.
Hello everybody, what's up? Welcome back to A People's Historian, the show where we read about 30 minutes of history together. My name is Jason Kishineff and we're reading an Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. Picking up in chapter 4. Remember, if you like the episode, if you like the show, if you like what you hear, hit that like and subscribe button. Hit the notification bell so you get notified each time I make a new video. Because YouTube has been known to unsubscribe people who listen to things like this that challenge the mainstream narrative. With no further ado, let's dig in. The Ohio Country. The settlers' war for independence from Britain paralleled a decade of Indian Wars, 1774 to 1783, all with settler rangers using extreme violence against indigenous non-combatants with the goals of total subjugation or expulsion. Remember, when we talk about non-combatants, we're talking about women and children and elderly people. The British governor of Virginia, John Murray, the 4th Earl of Dunmore, sided with British settlers who wanted land in the Ohio country, in part because he was himself a land speculator. In his view, no royal policy could prevent settlers' seizure of indigenous land. In early 1774, the Shawnee Nation in the Ohio Valley region responded to settler encroachment on its farmlands and hunting grounds by raiding illicit settlements and chasing out land surveyors. The settlers seem to have been waiting for just such an excuse to retaliate viciously. Dunmore commissioned 150 Virginia settler rangers to destroy Shawnee towns, and he mobilized the Virginia militia to invade the Ohio Valley and to proceed directly to their towns and, if possible, destroy their towns and magazines and distress them in every other way that is possible. That was a quotation. I feel like when I do this for a quotation, it looks like I'm not taking it seriously. But I'm just telling you it's a quotation. During Lord Dunmore's war, Shawnees and other indigenous peoples in what the Anglo-separatists would soon call the Northwest Territory realized that they were in a life or death struggle with these murdering bands of settlers who were led by a wealthy land speculator intent on destroying their nation and wiping them from the face of the earth. This realization led to another recurrent factor in the onslaught of European colonial ventures, the appearance of an accommodationist faction within the Shawnee Nation that accepted a humiliating peace agreement. Dunmore demanded all the Shawnee hunting grounds in what would later become, following U.S. independence, the state of Kentucky. Although Virginia did not get all the land Dunmore demanded, Dunmore's war was only the beginning of a 3-decade war against the Shawnee Nation and its allies. That alliance was led militarily in its resistance by the great Tecumseh, born in 1768, who had grown up in the midst of unrelenting warfare against his people, along with his brother Tenskwatawa. Tenskwatawa, also known as the prophet and the movement's spiritual leader. Dunmore's war pushed the Shawnees into an allegiance with the British against the separatists in 1777. Indigenous warriors struck scattered squatter settlements throughout the upper Ohio Valley region, driving hundreds of settlers from Shawnee territory. But the tide of war between the British and the separatists turned, allowing the Continental Congress to focus on the Ohio country and organize an offensive to annihilate the Shawnee Nation. 500 separatist fighters, composed of both militiamen and regulars, waged a genocidal war, rampaging against combatants and non-combatants alike. The Ranger force fell on the staunchly neutral towns of the Delaware Nation, torturing and killing women and children. In one particularly twisted incident, the settler troops slaughtered a Delaware boy who had been bird hunting alone. A near riot ensued among the troops over who had the right to claim the honor of the kill. Honor of the kill. See, it's hard to tell whether it's a quotation or honor. The Continental Congress sent 1,000 more fighters with orders to, and this is just a quotation, proceed without delay to destroy such towns of hostile tribes of Indians as he, Brigadier General Lachlan McIntosh, in his discretion shall think will most effectually chastise and terrify the savages and check their ravages on the frontiers. End quote. The Shawnees moved out of the way of the raiders to avoid the attacks, but the killing went on unabated. The settlers' escalation of extreme violence in the Ohio country led to perhaps the most outrageous war crime, which showed that indigenous conversion to Christianity and pacifism was no protection from genocide. Moravian missionizing among the ravaged Delaware communities in Pennsylvania had produced 3 Moravian Indian villages in the decades before the War for Independence had begun. Residents of one of the settlements named Holy Cow. No, it's not named Holy Cow. Residents of one of the settlements named Nadenhutten. That looks German to me, Germanic. Nadenhutten in eastern Ohio were displaced by British troops during fighting in the area, but were able to return to harvest their corn. Soon afterward, in March 1782, a settler militia from Pennsylvania under the command of David Williamson appeared and rounded up the Delawares, telling them they had to evacuate for their own safety. There were 42 men, 20 women, and 34 children in the group of Delawares. The militiamen searched their belongings to confiscate anything that could be used as a weapon, then announced that they were all to be killed, accusing them of having given refuge to Delawares who had killed white people. They were also accused of stealing the household items and tools they possessed, because such items should only belong to white people. Condemned to death, the Delawares spent the night praying and singing hymns. In the morning, Williamson's men marched over 90 people in pairs into 2 houses and methodically slaughtered them. One killer bragged that he personally had bludgeoned 14 victims with a cooper's mallet, which he had then handed to an accomplice. "My arm fails me. he was said to have announced, "Go on with the work." This action set a new bar for violence, and atrocities that followed routinely surpassed even that atrocity. A year earlier, the Delaware leader Buck-Ongi-Hellis, say that one I'm less confident about my pronunciation. Buck-Ongi-Hellis had addressed a group of Christianized Delawares, saying that he had known some good white men, but that the good ones were a small number. They do what they please. They enslave those who are not of their color, although created by the same great Spirit who created us. They would make slaves of us if they could, but as they cannot do it, they kill us. There is no faith to be placed in their words. They are not like the Indians, who are only enemies while at war, and are friends in peace. They will say to an Indian, "My friend, my brother." They will take him by the hand, and at the same moment destroy him. And so you will also be treated by them before long. Remember that this day I have warned you to beware of such friends as these. I know the long knives. They are not to be trusted. How the settlers won independence. Both the British and their settler separatist opponents realized that the key to victory on the southern frontier of the 13 colonies was an alliance with the Cherokee Nation. Despite constant attacks on its villages and crops, and with refugees and disease, the enormous Cherokee Nation remained intact, with a well-functioning government. To win the Cherokees to their side, British authorities provided weaponry and money to Cherokee towns, while separatist representatives tried to persuade the towns to remain neutral by threatening their complete destruction. Neutrality was the most the settlers could hope for. The settlers' viciousness towards indigenous people caused them to be despised and spurred some Cherokees to take sides against them. A few Cherokee towns that had been hit hardest by settler rangers responded by attacking squatter settlements, destroying several in the Carolinas in 1776. Following such attacks, separatists quickly announced their determination to destroy the Cherokee Nation. The North Carolina delegation to the Continental Congress declared the gross infernal breach of faith which they, the Cherokees, have been guilty of shuts them out from every pretension to mercy, and it is surely the policy of the southern colonies to carry fire and sword into the very bowels of their country and sink them so low that they may never be able again to rise and disturb the peace of their neighbors. End quote. Did I almost sound like I meant that? In the summer and fall of 1776, more than 5,000 settler rangers from Virginia, Georgia, and North and South Carolina stormed through Cherokee territory. William Henry Drayton, a leader of the Anglo-separatists from Charleston, had met with the Cherokees in 1775. After the Cherokee attack that prompted the separatists' 1776 Scorched Earth campaign, he recommended that the nation be extirpated and the lands become the property of the public. For my part, and it's a quote, it's a lot of quotes. For my part, I shall never give my voice for a peace with the Cherokee Nation upon any other terms than their removal beyond the mountains. As Cherokees fled, abandoning their towns and fields, the soldiers seized, killed, and scalped women and children. taking no prisoners. In mid-1780, 80 Virginia separatist settler rangers attacked the Shawnees in southern Ohio and spent a month destroying and looting their towns and fields. At the same time, the Cherokee Nation regained momentum in its resistance, raiding squatters' settlements within its territory. In retaliation, North Carolina sent 500 mounted rangers to burn Cherokee towns with orders to chastise that nation and reduce them to obedience. During the winter of 1780 to 81, the separatist 700-man Virginia militia wreaked destruction again in the Cherokee Nation. On Christmas Day, the militia commander wrote to Thomas Jefferson, then a Virginia delegate to the Continental Congress, that a detachment had surprised a party of Indians and taken one scalp and 17 horses loaded with clothing and skins and house furnishings. A clear sign that these were non-combatant refugees trying to flee. The commander also reported that his forces had thus far destroyed the principal Cherokee towns of Chpt, Skitigo, Chilhowee-Togue, Miklika, Kayati, Satugo, Tiliko, Hiwassee, and Chistawi. I'm not sure. Along with several smaller villages. All told, more than 1,000 homes had been laid waste, and some 50,000 bushels of corn and other provisions either burned or looted. At this point, the Virginia and North Carolina separatist authorities pooled their manpower and material and organized a force that effected a broad sweep of annihilation through the Cherokee towns, driving residents out into present-day Middle Tennessee and northern Alabama, where they exterminated indigenous families and burned down the towns in that area too. It's brutal. Throughout the war between separatist settlers and the forces of the monarchy, armed settlers waged total war against indigenous people, largely realizing their objectives. The Cherokees were forced to accept tributary status, yet the attacks continued. It would take nearly a half century after U.S. independence was won to forcibly remove the Cherokee Nation from the South. But the effort was unrelenting. For the settlers squatting on indigenous lands across the 1763 proclamation line of King George III, the wars waged by settlers during the War of Independence were a continuation of those their ancestors and other predecessors had waged since the early 17th century. Some historians portray the British as the organizers of indigenous resistance during this period, the separatist colonial oligarchy that drew up the Declaration of Independence in 1776 certainly took that view. Yet, as Grenier points out, the indigenous people were well aware that negotiating with a faraway empire would yield much better outcomes than would dealing with the government of extermination-minded settlers. The Haudenosaunee. On the western edge of the colony of New York, as in the southern colonies, settlers were invading and squatting on the territory of the Haudenosaunee, Six Nations Iroquois. by the mid-1770s. As with the Cherokee Nation, the British and the Separatists knew that the Haudenosaunee would be an important factor in their war, and, as with the Cherokee Nation, both parties sent representatives to the Haudenosaunee councils to appeal for their support. Each member nation of the Confederacy had its own specific interests because each had had different experiences in the previous century and a half of British and French intrusion. Much of the French and Indian War had been fought in their territories, with indigenous people doing most of the actual fighting on both sides. In 1775, the Mohawk Nation allied with the British against the separatist settlers. The Seneca Nation had early on considered the British to be an intractable enemy, but with the separatist war looming was more afraid of the settlers, and so the Senecas followed the Mohawks' lead into a British alliance. The Cayuga, Tuscarora, and Onondaga nations did not choose sides. Only the Christianized Oneidas conceded support for the separatist settlers. In response to the decisions by 5 of the Iroquois nations, General George Washington wrote instructions to Major General John Sullivan to take peremptory action against the Haudenosaunee, quote, to lay waste all the settlements around, that the country may not be merely overrun, but destroyed. You will not by any means listen to any overture of peace before the total ruin of their settlements is effected. Our future security will be in their inability to injure us, and in the terror with which the severity of the chastisement they receive will inspire them. End quote. Sullivan replied, the Indians shall see that there is malice enough in our hearts to destroy everything that contributes to their support. By 1779, the Continental Congress had decided to start with the Senecas. 3 armies were mustered to scorch the earth across New York and converge at Tioga, the principal Seneca town in what is now northern Pennsylvania. Their orders were to wipe out the Senecas and any other indigenous nation that opposed their separatist project, burning and looting all the villages, destroying the food supply, and turning the inhabitants into homeless refugees. The separatist governments of the New York and Pennsylvania colonies offered rangers for their project, and as an incentive for enlistment, the Pennsylvania Assembly authorized a bounty on Seneca scalps without regard to age or sex. This combination of Continental Army regulars, settler rangers, and commercial scalp hunters ravaged most of Seneca territory. With the Iroquois Confederacy disunited regarding the war, the Continental Army forces were practically unimpeded in their triumphal and deadly march. In another scenario, typically resulting from European and Anglo-American colonialism and neocolonialism, civil war erupted within the Iroquois Confederacy itself, with Mohawks destroying Oneida villages. The Oneidas could no longer give their separatist allies intelligence. By 1781, Grenier observes, after 3 seasons of the Indian War, New York's frontier had become a no man's land. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 4. Thanks for tuning in. You're a real trooper. This is not easy stuff, but it's important. I keep saying that, but it's true. So thanks for joining me. I hope to see you in the next episode.